My name is Carolyn Jean Martin. I found IDSVA because it kept coming into my worldview, not only at the College Art Association conference, but also from professors that I had, studying and getting a master's in philosophy. And one of the professors said, "Why are you doing this? You should be getting a doctorate." And she said, "There's this wonderful program." And then I decided to do an inquiry. One of the best things about IDSVA is that it's low residency and you're able to continue with what you're doing in the world, but also get this doctorate degree. And you can't do that at many other programs. It requires full-time engagement. And so to be able to continue my career and still pursue the inquiry that I had, that was important to me. I was interested in philosophy because I felt like it was the core of all questions. I have a master's in art history as well, and also one in fine art, studio arts. The questions that I had could only be answered through Western philosophy, particularly Kant and his study of aesthetics. And so that I had to, and the questions that I had, I was reading it myself and I wasn't getting to the core of what I needed to understand from the text. And I felt like this needs to be discussed with other people in this kind of academic environment. And so, and especially with other artists. And that's the key too. Studying philosophy in an academic, a more traditional academic program, it's people that are, philosophers. And so studying with people that are thinking about art making and thinking about making things and aesthetics and association with making things, that's very different. And it's a different conversation around philosophy. So they're dense text. And the wonderful thing about IDSVA is that you don't just read these texts once, you go back into them multiple times. And so in doing that, you're able to get a real understanding of what you're reading. Visual artists coming to the table of philosophy, they are thinking about making objects themselves. Representations that you're making are going to live in the world. In that process, to me, is just another layer to thinking about philosophy, because these philosophers are looking at, art making and representation in this way, from this distant, cool way from it, to say, okay, well, there's these things that are being made and this is how they live in the world, and let's look at this long trajectory. But when you are making an object with your own hands and making representation of something, that is another way of thinking about it. And so for me, that just, you're in conversation with yourself, with the canon of art that's been created, and now with these philosophers as well. And so I think that there's just a richer layer to the way you're thinking about these things. My dissertation is about Black women artists and their conversation that they're having with one another through feminist ideologies of care and regard for other Black women. It also deals with looking at the tie of Black women artists through the use of vernacular. And so I'm taking not just visual artists, but I'm looking at poets, fiction writers, performance artists, and seeing how they're tied together through this use of vernacular forms, but also through feminist ideology of care and regard for other Black women. Something about the program that surprised me was the amount of the types of friendships, the depth of the friendships and relationships that we have with one another in each of our cohorts. And the fact that despite that we're not in a traditional space in an institution, but we live all over the country and actually in the world as well, but constantly coming together, not just in the residencies and the class time, but supporting one another outside of that throughout, through text messages and phone calls, and the depth of those relationships is something that's been incredibly important to me and also surprised me, because I thought, oh, this would, we're all separated, how can we come together? But we do all the time. The core of the program in this critique of Western metaphysics. You know, you're reading these texts, and there was some resistance to wanting to study too much of these white Western philosophers, you know what I mean? And giving them too much weight, right? And so I think that the vision of the program in which to critique Western metaphysics, I think is an important one, but one that also, I think, given that space to do it in a philosophy program, surprised me. Because philosophy programs typically don't want critique of Western metaphysics, right? It becomes an elevation of it. And so I think given that space to do that was a refreshing surprise to me. Also, the thoughtfulness and the care that comes from the administrators and the faculty, as well as from other students. That support helped me to get through the program and to keep the energy that it takes in which to be on your own writing a dissertation. So that also, I haven't seen that in any of the other programs that I've been in, that level of support. So that was important as well. Speaking on a moment where a student became a teacher and a teacher becomes a student, at the residencies, there's this, I want to say, intimacy of conversation that happens where you see the professors that are in front of you actually learning from you. And there was a moment in particular, actually with David Driscoll, at one of the residencies that we had. And David Driscoll was talking to me about how he was an art historian, but also an artist and a philosopher as well. And I said, well, how do you have these multiple roles? Because that's what I do. I'm a visual artist. I also teach art history. And I'm interested in philosophy. So we had this mirror moment. And then we were talking and engaging about teaching and giving students this same kind of knowledge. And at that moment, we were talking about the texts that we use. And so he was learning from me, and he said, oh, I should talk to students about these, you know, these same texts as well. And so there was this moment of exchange where David's learning from me and I'm learning from him. And it was this kind of wonderful moment. And I was so pleased to have that moment with him, because as the David Driscoll Fellow here, he was not just as this teacher, but as a colleague in many ways. And so as even getting a doctorate too, we're professionals in the world too. You know, I'm a professor, so and so is he. And so that moment we became colleagues, and he's a mentor and I'm a mentor to him. So yeah, it was really beautiful.